So you've probably heard the term unlicensed game or pirated game, but what's the difference? When you hear the term pirate or bootleg, you might automatically think bad, but is that really the case? We're going to take a look at one of the most well-known pirated game companies, Hummer Team. What's going on? It's Podrez coming at you with another video. Alright, so if you've seen a couple of my videos and you like what I do, hit the subscribe button right there. We're very close to 20,000 subscribers, only you can help me get there. As usual, I will plaster a picture of our Discord community, discord.podrez.net. I'll also put a link in the description. Anyway, let's talk about Hummer Team. So what's the difference between an unlicensed game and a bootleg one? Because while all bootlegs are unlicensed, not all unlicensed games are bootlegs. We'll start off very basic. A game is considered unlicensed when it's published without the console manufacturer's knowledge. For example, Menace Beach is an NES game, but was published without Nintendo's permission. Therefore, it's an unlicensed game. Most console manufacturers required approval before games could be published on their console. So why did companies release games behind the console manufacturer's back? Using Nintendo as an example, unlicensed game companies wanted to get around their very harsh restrictions. If you didn't seek a license from Nintendo, you received 100% of the profits from your game and were allowed to make as many games as you wanted. Both of these things were normally capped by Nintendo, and other companies had similar but usually more lenient policies. But there were some disadvantages to going the unlicensed route. Most retail stores didn't carry unlicensed games, and console revisions would render unlicensed games useless. The companies that made these titles usually didn't have the tools to make games for the respective consoles, so as a result, most unlicensed games were crappy. This is how unlicensed games got their bad reputation. However, unlicensed games are not illegal to produce, nor is there any copyright infringement in them. Therefore, they're not considered bootlegs. In 1992, a few employees who left C&E, who were best known for Bubble Bath Babes and Mermaids of Atlantis, created their own company called Hummer Team. They would use their experience from C&E to start making games that same year. Except rather than returning to unlicensed games, the company went all out and developed pirated games. For a game to be considered a bootleg, one or more properties have to be stolen from elsewhere without permission. This can be something as small as lifting assets from other games. For example, the game Magic Jewelry uses background graphics that were stolen from another game. However, bigger copyright infringement can happen too, and this would become Hummer Team's business model. They took big franchises, usually from 16-bit consoles, and made unlicensed NES remakes of them. For example, Super Mario World on the NES, which we'll look at shortly, was obviously not authorized by Nintendo. Making pirated games had some advantages. It took a lot of pressure off developers because they could use assets from other games rather than creating their own graphics and music. Most licensed games require a team of people to create, so by resorting to stealing assets from elsewhere, you don't need as big of a team. Going back to Magic Jewelry, the creator of the game, Wan Xinwei, created most of his games, if not all of them, by himself. By using unauthorized properties like Mario and Street Fighter, the brand awareness alone might attract consumers to buy the games, even if they're pirated. Most of Hummer Team's games were NES remakes of well-known 16-bit titles, so that could attract consumers too. Most people didn't opt to purchase the latest and greatest consoles and would keep their older units instead. Maybe someone will buy Super Mario World on NES because they can't get the Super Nintendo version. It was difficult for Nintendo and other companies to go after these bootleg developers. Most of these developers had aliases, and the employees were usually unknown, with some exceptions. It's hard to go after someone if you don't know who they are. So here's the big question. Hummer Team most likely didn't have the tools to make games like official Nintendo licensees did, and they lifted properties from other games. So people might automatically assume these games are bad, but is that really the case? Let's take an honest look at their games. We'll start off with Street Fighter 2. This version was scaled down quite a bit. You can only play as 4 characters, although there's 6 of them total, and there's no visual showing their heads at the bottom. Unfortunately, the character sprites have much less detail and there's a lot of flickering, especially when a knockout is achieved. It's the NES though. I'm not sure how they could have achieved a fighting game on this. Tournament Fighters by Konami turned out pretty well on the NES, although there is some flickering. At one point during my playthrough, the game froze for no reason. I'm not sure what happened, but I had to reset. The music is not super great either. I do have to give a lot of credit to Hummer Team though. A lot of the characters' special moves are here despite only having an A and B button to work with. It would have been better if they could have included all the characters, but otherwise this is a great effort. Here's an interesting one, Kart Fighter. This is one of their more well-known games. The title screen looks identical to Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo, and all the characters from that game are here. But when you start playing, you'll know it's obviously not Mario Kart. The game uses the same engine as Street Fighter 2 with some small modifications. The character designs are bizarre, with most of them looking angry. You would never see Nintendo make them look like this. The graphics are ripped from other games like Little Nemo on the NES and Mario and Wario on the Super Famicom. Like with Street Fighter 2, there is a lot of sprite flickering, but I do think a Mario fighting game with Mario Kart characters is a creative, although strange, concept, and it is playable. Let's try Aladdin. It's a demake of the Super Nintendo version. You play as Aladdin, obviously, and you just have to walk to the right to complete the stage. You can swing on some platforms and you're able to grab on the ledges. Graphically, the game looks great, which makes sense because they stole all the assets from the Super Nintendo version. The gameplay is surprisingly accurate too. This actually feels like the Super Nintendo game. The climbing mechanics don't feel quite as good though. Aladdin has a lot of trouble climbing on the ledges. He has to be in the absolute perfect spot in order to grab on. This is a decent recreation of the Super Nintendo version though. Here's Donkey Kong Country 4. Despite it being the fourth game, it's actually a demake of the first one. It's a platformer where you must walk to the right to win. You can either jump on the enemies or use your dash attack to defeat them. The game was heavily scaled down from the Super Nintendo version. The world map is the only map that's here. The maps where you select your level are gone. Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong are also never on screen together, probably to avoid too many sprites on the screen. The animal buddies that you can ride are no longer here, and the save feature was replaced with a password system. Better than nothing, I guess. The music has that same Hummer Team mediocrity, but some stages sound alright. The controls could be better. Your dash attack has very poor range and is almost never worth doing. Despite the drawbacks, I did have some fun with this one. This is more than playable. Hummer Team also made a lazy ROM hack of this game called Jungle Book 2. This version starts you off on level 3, and the only change is the character you play as. None of the other graphics were changed. This is lame. Here's another well-known game of theirs, Super Mario World. Surprisingly, this is a fairly done recreation. Most of the features from the Super Nintendo version made it onto here. You can still carry an item on reserve, and you're able to ride Yoshi. The last one is a remarkable achievement because not even Nintendo was confident that Yoshi could be implemented in an NES game. Graphically, most of the level scenery makes an appearance. There's water levels, grassy plains, ghost houses, and castles. Obviously, they were all ripped from the original game. For some reason, they chose to use Mario Sprite from Super Mario 3 rather than the game they're trying to steal from. The world map is here too, and we can see that there's a lot of content. There were a few things that were cut though. There's no longer alternate paths that you can take, and in general, there's not as many levels. The biggest flaw with the game though are the controls. Mario can run extremely fast, but he loses speed when he jumps. This makes platforming extremely difficult and the game almost completely unplayable. Had it not been for this issue, I would have praised the game, but unfortunately the poor controls ruined this one for me. Apparently there's a Game Genie code that fixes the jumping issue, which makes me think that Hummer Team almost had it right, but not quite. Here's their most well-known game, Somari. This is a very humorous one. You play as Mario in Sonic's world, and you must walk to the right to complete the stage. Surprisingly, you can spin dash, which was not in the original Sonic 1. It's ambitious that they were able to include every zone from the Genesis games except for Scrap Brain Zone. Graphically, the game does look acceptable. Labyrinth Zone especially looks very close to the Genesis version. The special stages are here, but they had to use the ones from the Game Gear version rather than the Genesis version. I'm not surprised, as it would have been impossible to have a rotating stage on the NES. Unfortunately, the poor physics really hold this game back. It feels nothing like a Sonic game. It takes a long time to get Mario to run at full speed, and you lose your momentum way too easily. Mario cannot accelerate while in the air, and the level design makes it difficult for Mario to move fast. Mario cannot jump while he's rolling, so if you try to spin dash, he won't be able to jump until he makes a complete stop. The game can also be glitchy. In Spring Yard Zone, I somehow got stuck inside the wall and wasn't able to get out. This could have been a decent game, but unfortunately the bad controls make this a rough experience. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what Hummer Team's games were like. The quality of these titles were definitely not on the level of Konami, Capcom, or Sunsoft, but for bootleg standards, these are passable games. Hummer Team was a surprisingly competent company that knew what they were doing, despite some of their games having issues. Some people may not know the difference between an unlicensed game and a pirated one, and may assume that they're all bad. Bootlegs are a type of unlicensed game, but bootlegs often steal content from other games, which is not the case with regular unlicensed games. A lot of unlicensed games tend to be bad because the companies behind them don't have the proper tools to make them. Hummer Team, however, made surprisingly decent games. So there you have it, bootlegs are not always bad. Hey, I just wanted to thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, hit that like button. If you enjoy this type of content, hit the subscribe button for more content. Both of these things really help the channel grow. If you have anything to share, feel free to leave a comment. I read every single comment on this channel, and I'm pretty good at replying back. Anyway, have a good one.